In the heart of downtown Chicago, during the harsh winter of 2023, Michael Reacher stood as the embodiment of corporate success. As the CEO of Horizon Hospitality Group, a chain of upscale restaurants that had expanded across 3 states in just 5 years, he had built his reputation on innovation and efficiency. At 42, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suits projected the image of a man who had everything figured out. The company's mission statement, proudly displayed in the lobby of their headquarters, read, "Nourishing communities through exceptional food and genuine care." Yet, as Reacher would soon discover, these words had become little more than corporate decoration. On a particularly bitter Tuesday evening in January, Reacher decided to visit one of his flagship restaurants, the Silver Spoon, for an impromptu quality check. The restaurant buzzed with the typical dinner crowd: business professionals unwinding after work, couples celebrating special occasions, and tourists seeking the authentic Chicago dining experience. As he observed operations from a corner table, something unusual caught his attention. Emily Winters, a line cook who had been with the company for nearly 3 years, was speaking with Marcus, the restaurant manager. Their conversation seemed tense, with Emily gesturing emphatically while Marcus repeatedly shook his head. Eventually, Marcus reluctantly signed a form and handed it back to Emily, who tucked it into her pocket with visible relief. Reacher's curiosity was piqued. In all his years running the business, he had never seen such a formal exchange between staff during service hours. After the restaurant closed, Reacher approached Marcus about the interaction. "Oh, that," Marcus sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Emily submits a formal request every week to take home leftover food. Company policy requires manager approval for any food leaving the premises, even if it's headed for the dumpster. Honestly, it's a bit of a hassle, but she's insistent about following protocol." Reacher nodded, but something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Emily was one of their most reliable employees, always punctual, rarely calling in sick, and willing to cover shifts at a moment's notice. Why would someone so dependable need to formally request food that would otherwise be thrown away? Rather than heading home in his warm luxury sedan, Reacher found himself waiting in the parking lot, watching as Emily emerged from the back door, carrying a carefully wrapped package. Emily didn't notice her boss's presence as she hurried to catch the last bus of the night. She wore a threadbare coat that seemed woefully inadequate against the biting Chicago wind, her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Something compelled Reacher to follow her, not out of suspicion, but from a growing sense that there was more to Emily's story than he had ever bothered to learn. He kept a respectful distance as she rode the bus to the outskirts of the city, where the gleaming skyscrapers gave way to industrial zones and forgotten neighborhoods. When she finally stepped off at a stop that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, Reacher hesitated before continuing his pursuit. The ethical implications of following an employee home weighed on him, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't right pushed him forward. The trailer park where Emily eventually stopped was a collection of aging mobile homes, many with visible signs of disrepair: missing siding, patched windows, and makeshift repairs. The gravel paths between units were poorly lit, with only the occasional street lamp casting pools of yellow light on the frozen ground. Emily approached one of the smaller trailers at the far end of the community, its exterior weathered by years of neglect. Before she could even knock, the door flew open, and 3 children burst out, wrapping their arms around her legs with such force that she nearly lost her balance. "Mommy's home," they cheered in unison, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10, while the youngest appeared to be around 4. Despite their circumstances, their faces lit up with genuine joy at their mother's return. From his vantage point behind a neighbor's shed, Reacher felt a knot forming in his stomach as he realized he had never known Emily was a mother, let alone to 3 children. Through the open door, Reacher caught glimpses of the trailer's interior, a space so cramped that it seemed impossible for 4 people to live there comfortably. An elderly woman sat in a rocking chair near a small space heater, her arthritic hands clutching a worn blanket around her shoulders. "Did you bring something good tonight, Emmy?" the woman asked, her voice thin but warm with affection. "The kids saved you some of the mac and cheese, but they were mighty hungry today," Emily smiled, though Reacher could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "I got lucky, Grandma," she replied, unwrapping the package from the restaurant. "Chef made beef bourguignon tonight, and there were plenty of dinner rolls left over. We can have a feast." The children's eyes widened at the sight of the food, and the youngest one clapped her hands in delight. "Real meat," she exclaimed, as if it were a rare treasure, rather than something Reacher took for granted every day. As he watched this scene unfold, the CEO felt something crack within him, the carefully constructed wall between his professional success and the human cost of the wages his company paid. Reacher remained frozen in place, the bitter cold seeping through his expensive wool coat as he continued to observe the family through the windows of the trailer. Emily carefully divided the food onto 5 mismatched plates, giving the largest portions to the children and her grandmother. When the youngest child asked why her mother wasn't eating much, Emily smoothly deflected, claiming she had already eaten at work, a lie Reacher knew to be untrue. The staff meal had been served hours earlier, and Emily had been too busy covering for an absent colleague to take more than a few hurried bites. As the family ate, Emily listened intently to her children's stories about school, helping the middle child with a math worksheet while simultaneously sorting through a stack of mail that appeared to consist mostly of bills marked "Final Notice" and "Urgent." The grandmother occasionally dozed off mid-conversation, her medication bottles lined up on a small table beside her chair, prescriptions that Reacher suspected consumed a significant portion of Emily's income. After dinner, Emily orchestrated an efficient bedtime routine in the cramped space. The children took turns washing up in a bathroom barely larger than a closet, while Emily transformed the small living area into a sleeping space by pulling out a sofa bed for the children. The scene that truly shattered Reacher's composure came after the children were tucked in. Emily kissed each child goodnight, then checked on her grandmother, who was already asleep in the trailer's only bedroom. Only then, believing herself unobserved, did Emily's carefully maintained facade crumble. She sank down onto the floor, her back against the wall, and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, the kind that come from someone who has learned that crying aloud is a luxury they cannot afford. After a few moments, she wiped her eyes, unrolled a thin camping mattress from behind the sofa, and laid it on the floor in the narrow space between the kitchen and living area. This, Reacher realized with a sickening clarity, was where one of his full-time employees slept night after night. The drive back to his penthouse apartment in the city center was the longest of Reacher's life. The contrast between Emily's reality and his own was so stark, it felt almost obscene. His mind raced with calculations. Emily made $14.5 an hour as a line cook, working an average of 55 hours per week across 2 of his restaurants. Even with overtime, her monthly income would barely cover rent in a decent apartment, let alone support 3 children and an elderly dependent with medical needs. The company's health insurance had a high deductible that would make regular doctor visits prohibitively expensive for someone in her position. The employee assistance program he had proudly implemented last year offered counseling services, but nothing to address immediate financial hardships. Most damning of all, he realized that the company's recent cost-cutting measures had eliminated the free staff meal that had once been standard, replacing it with a discounted meal that still cost employees $5, an amount Emily clearly couldn't spare. As he pulled into the heated garage beneath his building, Reacher couldn't shake the image of Emily sleeping on that thin mattress on the floor, having given everything, even her own comfort, and nourishment to care for her family. Sleep evaded Reacher that night. He tossed and turned in his king-sized bed, haunted by the images of Emily's life. The contrast between the company's slogan, nourishing communities through exceptional food and genuine care, and the reality of an employee who couldn't afford to feed her family properly, created a cognitive dissonance he couldn't reconcile. By a.m., he sat at his home office desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and company policies, a half-empty bottle of scotch beside him. He pulled up Emily's employee file, discovering details he should have known. She had been with the company for 3 years and 2 months, had never been late, had called in sick exactly twice, and had consistently received excellent performance reviews. Yet her hourly wage had increased by only 75 cents since her hiring. Further digging revealed she had applied for the company's emergency assistance fund last year when her grandmother needed dental surgery, but had been denied because the fund was limited to immediate family members, a policy he himself had approved without considering its implications. As dawn broke over the Chicago skyline, Reacher made a decision that would fundamentally change his company. He showered, dressed, and arrived at corporate headquarters before anyone else. The security guard did a double take as Reacher walked in at 6:30 a.m., a time when the CEO was typically still enjoying his morning routine of meditation and gourmet coffee. By 7:15, he had drafted a series of policy changes and called an emergency meeting of his executive team for a.m. When his bewildered executives filed into the conference room, they found a transformed leader. Gone was the polished, somewhat detached CEO who typically focused on growth metrics and profit margins. In his place stood a man with reddened eyes and an intensity that commanded attention. "I visited the Silver Spoon last night," he began, his voice steady despite his lack of sleep, "and I discovered something unacceptable. We have built this company on the backs of people who cannot feed their families properly, who sleep on floors, who skip meals so their children can eat. This ends today." The executives shifted uncomfortably as Reacher outlined what he had witnessed. Some looked genuinely shocked. Others avoided eye contact, suggesting they had suspected such realities but had chosen not to examine them too closely. Reacher didn't spare himself in his critique. "I've been blind," he admitted, "willfully blind to the consequences of our policies. I've convinced myself that market rates for wages were fair simply because they were common. I've approved benefit packages without considering whether they actually benefit our most vulnerable employees. I've celebrated our charitable donations to food banks without recognizing that our own staff might be their clients." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The CFO, Victoria Mercer, a woman known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, cleared her throat. "Michael, while this is certainly concerning, we have shareholders to consider. Any significant increase in labor costs will—" Reacher cut her off with a raised hand. "Victoria, I'm not interested in what we can't do. I want solutions for what we must do. If our business model only works by keeping our employees in poverty, then our business model is broken." The meeting lasted 3 hours, with heated debates about financial implications and implementation timelines. By the end, Reacher had secured commitment for immediate action on several fronts. First, a company-wide audit of all hourly employees' wages would be conducted, with adjustments to ensure everyone earned at least $3 above the local living wage. Second, the Employee Assistance Program would be overhauled to include emergency housing support, transportation assistance, and a no-questions-asked food security program. Third, the staff meal policy would be reinstated immediately, with all employees entitled to a free meal during their shift and the option to take home leftover food that would otherwise be discarded. The HR director was tasked with creating a confidential survey to better understand employees' living situations and challenges, while the operations team began working on flexible scheduling options for employees with caregiving responsibilities. As the executives filed out, some energized by the new direction, and others clearly concerned about their quarterly bonuses, Reacher remained seated, staring at the final item on his agenda, Emily Winters. At p.m., Reacher walked into the Silver Spoon during pre-service preparations. The kitchen staff froze at the unexpected appearance of the CEO, their hands hovering over partially chopped vegetables and half-assembled dishes. Emily was at her station, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, dark circles visible beneath her eyes despite her attempt to conceal them. She straightened when she saw him, a flicker of fear crossing her face, the instinctive reaction of someone who has learned that attention from authority figures rarely brings good news. "Miss Winters," Reacher said, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it in a professional setting. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The other kitchen staff exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Emily wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous gesture that betrayed her anxiety. "Of course, Mr. Reacher," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She followed him to the manager's office, her posture rigid with apprehension. The small room, with its desk cluttered with schedules and inventory forms, felt suddenly inadequate for the conversation Reacher needed to have. "Please, sit down," Reacher said, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. Emily perched on the edge of the seat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, the posture of someone preparing to receive bad news with dignity. Reacher took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "Emily, I want to be transparent with you. Last night, after our manager mentioned your requests for leftover food, I followed you home." Emily's face drained of color, her eyes widening with a mixture of shock and humiliation. Before she could respond, Reacher continued, "I know that was an invasion of your privacy, and I'm deeply sorry. There's no excuse for it. But what I saw your situation, your family, the conditions you're living in while working full-time for my company, it's forced me to confront some hard truths." Emily's expression shifted from fear to confusion, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. "I don't understand, sir. Are you? Am I in trouble for taking the food?" The question, asked in a voice barely above a whisper, revealed volumes about the power imbalance between them, that her first concern would be punishment rather than the violation of her privacy. "No, Emily, you're not in trouble. Not at all," Reacher said, his voice cracking slightly. "If anyone should be in trouble, it's me. I've failed you as an employer, and I've failed every employee who's struggling like you are." He pulled out a folder containing the documents he had prepared earlier that morning. "Effective immediately, your hourly wage is being increased to $22.5. You'll be offered a salaried sous chef position within 3 months, with full benefits including comprehensive health care that extends to dependents and secondary family members living in your household." Emily's mouth opened slightly, her eyes darting between Reacher's face and the papers he was sliding across the desk. Disbelief was written across her features as if she were waiting for the punchline to a cruel joke. "Additionally," Reacher continued, "the company is establishing an emergency assistance fund that doesn't require lengthy applications or justifications. You qualify for immediate housing assistance." He placed another document before her, a lease agreement for a 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, within walking distance of a well-rated elementary school. The company will cover the security deposit and first 3 months' rent. After that, the rent will be subsidized to ensure it never exceeds 25% of your income. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she stared at the documents before her, her hands trembling too much to reach for them. "I don't understand," she whispered again, but this time the confusion stemmed from unexpected kindness rather than fear. "Why would you do this? For me?" Reacher leaned forward, meeting her gaze directly. "Because you deserve it, Emily. Because you've worked incredibly hard for this company while sacrificing everything for your family. Because no one who works full-time should have to skip meals or sleep on a floor. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. And because your situation made me realize how disconnected I've become from the people who make this company successful. This isn't charity, it's correcting an injustice that I allowed to happen. Emily's tears flowed freely now, years of carefully maintained composure crumbling in the face of unexpected relief. My kids, she managed between sobs, my grandmother's medications. I've been choosing between heat and her heart pills this month. Reacher felt his own eyes burning as the full weight of her daily choices became clear choices no parent, no caregiver should ever have to make. The conversation continued for nearly an hour as Reacher explained all the changes being implemented. Emily gradually transitioned from disbelief to cautious hope, asking practical questions about the timeline for moving and whether her children would need to change schools. When they finally emerged from the office, the kitchen staff pretended to be absorbed in their prep work, though their furtive glances revealed their curiosity about what had transpired. Marcus, the restaurant manager, approached with a concerned expression, clearly expecting to mediate some conflict. Instead, he found Emily with tear-stained cheeks but a smile that transformed her entire face. "Marcus," Reacher said, his tone making it clear this was not a suggestion. "Emily needs the rest of the day off to handle some important matters." With pay, of course, he turned to Emily. "The real estate agent will meet you at the apartment at p.m. Take your time. Make sure it suits your family's needs. If it doesn't, we'll find something that does." As Emily gathered her belongings, still looking somewhat dazed by the sudden turn of events, Reacher addressed the entire kitchen staff. "There will be a mandatory all-staff meeting tomorrow morning. Major changes are coming to how this company operates and how we compensate our team. Every single one of you deserves better than what we've been providing." The following day, employees from all of Horizon Hospitality Group's restaurants gathered in the company's headquarters, filling the large conference room to capacity with additional staff watching via video link from the break rooms of their respective locations. The atmosphere buzzed with speculation, and nervous energy. Company-wide meetings were rare and usually signaled major restructuring or bad news. Emily sat in the front row, having arrived early after dropping her children off at school. She had spent the previous evening showing her family the apartment that would soon be their home, watching as her children ran excitedly from room to room, marveling at the space, the working appliances, the fact that each of them would have a bed. Her grandmother had stood in the kitchen, running her gnarled fingers over the smooth countertops, tears streaming down her weathered face. "No more drafts in winter," she had whispered, as if afraid to believe it was real. Now Emily sat straight-backed in her chair, still processing the whirlwind of changes that had occurred in less than 24 hours. Reacher stepped to the podium, surveying the room filled with the people who brought his restaurants to life: cooks, servers, dishwashers, hosts, bartenders, and managers. Many avoided eye contact. Some fidgeted nervously. All waited to learn what this unusual gathering meant for their livelihoods. "Yesterday," Reacher began, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I had a revelation that has fundamentally changed how I view this company and my role within it." He recounted his experience following Emily home, being careful to take full responsibility for his invasion of privacy while emphasizing the systemic issues it had revealed. As he spoke, he could see the shift in the room, employees exchanging glances, some nodding in recognition of struggles similar to Emily's, others looking surprised that their CEO was acknowledging such realities. "The mission statement on our wall claims we nourish communities," Reacher continued, gesturing to the elegant lettering visible through the conference room's glass wall. "But we have failed to nourish the very people who make that mission possible. Today, that changes. For the next hour, Reacher outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented immediately across all Horizon properties. The minimum wage for all positions would increase significantly, with experienced staff seeing proportional raises. The employee benefits package was being overhauled to include practical assistance like childcare subsidies, transportation allowances, and housing support. Staff meals would not only return, but would be expanded to include family meal packages for employees who needed them. A new emergency fund would provide immediate assistance without bureaucratic hurdles, and the company would partner with local organizations to offer financial literacy workshops, educational assistance, and pathways to advancement within the company. As Reacher spoke, the atmosphere in the room transformed. The initial tension gave way to cautious optimism, then to genuine excitement as employees began to calculate what these changes would mean for their daily lives. Some were openly weeping, others sat in stunned silence, and a few reached out to squeeze the hands of colleagues beside them. When Reacher opened the floor for questions, there was a moment of hesitation before hands shot up across the room, not with challenges or skepticism, but with clarifications and suggestions for additional improvements. The meeting concluded with a commitment that would have been unthinkable just days before. Reacher announced the formation of an employee advisory council with representatives from every level of the organization, tasked with ongoing evaluation of company policies and their real-world impact on staff. "I don't want another Emily situation," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "I don't want anyone in this company suffering silently while I remain oblivious in my corner office." As the meeting dispersed, employees lingered in small groups, discussing the implications of what they had just heard. Many approached Emily, some with congratulations, others with quiet admissions of their own struggles. A dishwasher confessed he had been living in his car for 3 months after a rent increase. A server revealed she had been rationing her insulin, taking less than her prescribed dose to make it last longer. These stories flowed freely now, unburdened by the shame that had previously kept them hidden. Reacher moved through the crowd, listening more than speaking, making notes of issues that needed immediate attention. The corporate headquarters, usually a place of polished professionalism and careful distance, hummed with a new energy, the unmistakable electricity of hope. 3 months later, Emily stood in her kitchen, preparing Sunday dinner for her family and special guests. The apartment had transformed from an empty space into a true home, with children's artwork adorning the refrigerator, comfortable furniture acquired piece by piece, and the luxury of family photos in actual frames on the walls. Her grandmother sat at the dining table, sorting her medications into a weekly pill organizer medications that were now fully covered by the improved insurance plan. The children were setting the table, arguing good-naturedly about who would sit where, their voices carrying the easy confidence of children who no longer worried about having enough to eat. The doorbell rang, and Emily wiped her hands on a kitchen towel before answering. Reacher stood in the hallway, accompanied by his wife and teenage son, a bottle of sparkling cider in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. "I hope we're not too early," he said, suddenly seeming unsure of himself outside the corporate environment. Emily smiled and stepped back to welcome them in. "You're right on time. The lasagna is just about ready." As they entered, Emily's youngest daughter ran up to Reacher, proudly holding up a report card with a row of gold stars. "Look, Mr. Reacher, I got all as this term." The CEO crouched down to her level, examining the report card with exaggerated seriousness before breaking into a genuine smile. "That's outstanding, Lily. I'm not surprised at all you're clearly as hardworking and brilliant as your mother." The dinner that followed was unlike any interaction Reacher had ever had with an employee. There were no power dynamics at play, no corporate agendas to push, just two families sharing a meal and conversation. Emily's grandmother regaled them with stories from her youth, while the children peppered Reacher's son with questions about high school. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Emily served coffee in the small living room. "I have some news," she said, a hint of pride coloring her voice. "I've been accepted into the culinary management program at the community college. With the tuition assistance program and my new schedule as sous chef, I can take evening classes twice a week." Reacher's wife reached over to squeeze Emily's hand. "That's wonderful. Michael tells me you have a real talent for developing new recipes." Emily nodded, a blush rising to her cheeks. "The head chef has already put 2 of my dishes on the specials menu. They've been selling out every night." As the conversation continued, Reacher found himself observing the scene with a sense of profound satisfaction. This was what success truly looked like, not just profit margins and expansion plans, but the tangible improvement in people's lives. The company's financial reports had shown that despite the increased labor costs, employee retention had improved so dramatically that training expenses had plummeted. Productivity was up, customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and the positive press from their wage reforms had attracted new customers who wanted to support socially responsible businesses. As the evening drew to a close and the Reachers prepared to leave, Emily walked them to the door. Her youngest daughter, Lily, tugged at Reacher's sleeve before he could step into the hallway. "Mr. Reacher," she said, her voice serious despite her small stature, "before you helped us, my mommy used to cry at night when she thought we were sleeping. She doesn't cry anymore." The simple observation, delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, struck Reacher with unexpected force. He knelt down to Lily's level, finding himself momentarily unable to speak. Emily placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes meeting Reacher's over the child's head. "Lily notices everything," she said softly. "But she's right. I used to feel like I was drowning a little more each day, no matter how hard I swam." She took a deep breath, her composure momentarily wavering. "What you did, it wasn't just about the money or the apartment. It was about dignity, about being seen." Reacher nodded, understanding the profound truth in her words. As a CEO, he had always viewed his role as steering the company toward financial success. Now he recognized that true leadership meant seeing the humanity in every person who contributed to that success. The changes at Horizon Hospitality Group continued to ripple outward in the months that followed. Other restaurant groups in Chicago began to face pressure from their own employees, who pointed to Horizon's example as evidence that better wages and working conditions were possible in the industry. Reacher found himself invited to speak at business conferences, not about profit maximization strategies, but about the business case for ethical employment practices. He always began these talks with Emily's story, careful to acknowledge his own initial blindness, while emphasizing the transformative power of simply paying attention. "The most expensive mistake I ever made as a CEO," he would tell his audience of business leaders, "was believing that I could separate the company's success from the well-being of the people who created that success." Some executives dismissed his approach as idealistic or financially unsustainable, but others reached out privately, asking for guidance on implementing similar changes in their own organizations. A movement was building slowly but steadily, challenging the assumption that service industry jobs must inherently be low-wage positions with minimal benefits. 1 year after that fateful night, when Reacher followed Emily home, Horizon Hospitality Group held a company-wide celebration. They had not only survived the increased labor costs, but had thrived, opening 2 new locations with their revised business model built in from the start. Employee turnover had decreased by 78%, saving hundreds of thousands in training costs and improving service quality dramatically. The event was held in the largest of their restaurants, transformed for the evening into a space for recognition and reflection. Emily, now the head chef at the Silver Spoon, after her predecessor moved to open one of the new locations, stood at Reacher's side as he addressed the gathered employees. "A year ago," he began, I stumbled upon a truth that should have been obvious, that a company is not its buildings or its brand, or even its balance sheet. A company is its people, all of its people, and their collective well-being determines its true success. He raised his glass in a toast, his gaze sweeping across the room filled with faces that now looked back at him with respect rather than apprehension. To seeing each other clearly, to valuing each other properly, and to building a company where no one has to choose between feeding their family and keeping the lights on. As glasses clinked throughout the room, Emily caught Reacher's eye and mouthed two simple words that encompassed everything. "Thank you," but Reacher shook his head slightly, his response equally simple but profound. "No, thank you for showing me what really matters."